Aw, yeah, you know what that sound is, don't ya? That's a crisp, refreshing coffee is for closers from Fullsteam Brewery in Durham, North Carolina. My guest today is Lilly Wilson, the founder of Fullsteam, and he's about to tell us how someone who hadn't ever homebrewed came to start one of the region's best, most interesting microbreweries. Sean started out simply wanting to enjoy a true-to-style IPA, but North Carolina's laws prohibited the brewing or sale of anything higher than 6% alcohol by volume. So he got to work changing those pesky laws and ended up with the right relationships to start not just a brewery, but a brand. As you're about to hear, it's the way they created their story that helped them get a real foothold and continue to grow. So put that coffee down, grab a cold one, and enjoy.
Welcome to the Build Cycle, the podcast by Tyler Benedict that explores the startup stories and growth tactics of hundreds of entrepreneurs, plus his own tips and tricks learned over 2 decades of launching, running, and growing businesses, including BikeRumor.com, the world's largest and most popular cycling tech blog. If you're thinking of starting your own business, the Build Cycle will give you the tools and inspiration to do it right. Now, let's dive into this episode of The Build Cycle.
So Sean, you got into the beer business not because you wanted to open a brewery, but because you weren't real thrilled with the laws at the time regarding the alcohol limit that was allowed for canned or bottled beer in North Carolina, right?
Yeah, any kind of beer, draft beer, any packaged beer. But yeah, my path into beer is kind of non-traditional in the sense that I didn't start up a brewery because I was a home brewer or had some kind of brewing expertise that I wanted to take from my backyard to go commercial. But instead I worked on this legislative challenge in the mid-2000s. It was called Pop the Cap, and at the time, North Carolina restricted alcohol by volume in beer to under 6%. So a brewery couldn't brew beer above 6%, retailer couldn't sell beer above 6%. We were one of 5 states with this restriction. And it wasn't really about the alcohol percentage as much as it was being able to brew to style. You brew, and an IPA should be 6 to 8% in general, right? A barley wine should be around 9 or 10%. All these beers were illegal for 70 years, and it was just a stupid carryover from Prohibition that needed to change. So I, with a bunch of other people, worked on this legislative effort just as a volunteer, as a kind of grassroots lobbying endeavor. And during that time, that 2.5-year process, I realized I loved craft beer, I loved the people, and I kind of considered myself an entrepreneur in waiting. And that was a good time for me to break away and to start my own business.
Right. So it wasn't that you just wanted a stronger beer. You just wanted to have a proper IPA or a proper style of beer available to you as a consumer.
Yeah, and it's true. It really was not about the alcohol percentage itself. It's about an IPA should be in this range. A Belgian ale should be in this range, and just the glaring inconsistencies that where beer was the only beverage with that restriction imposed upon it. It'd be akin to saying, well, you can have a Pinot Noir, but you can't have a Cabernet, or you can have a white Zinfandel, but you can't have a fortified wine. It's just one of those goofy laws. It was really an inertia. It's just somebody needed to put together, and people needed to put together an effort to change it, because legislators aren't going to take that on their own. So it was really a consumer-driven initiative.
Right. And what were you doing before? And when you were doing that, or whatever it was it a full-time job that you were doing this legislative push on the side, or did you quit that and this was gung-ho?
So I started when I first got involved in Pop the Cap. I was underemployed, to say the least. I was definitely looking for work and struggling to find meaningful work. I then turned my passion and attention to craft beer, I also found a job, but it afforded me some flexibility. Actually, I had 2 jobs during that 3-year span that afforded me some flexibility to pursue this, but not inhibit my ability to just get work done. So I worked at the Duke Alumni Association for a year, and then I worked at a company called Weather News out of San Francisco. It's a weather services, Japanese-based weather services company of all things. But both of those, in different scenarios for different reasons, they both kind of afforded me time to be able to explore this, or to pursue the role of leading Pop the Cap, as well as kind of start thinking about what's it going to look like for me long term. What do I really want to do?
Right. But it seems like a big undertaking. Anytime you want to change laws, it's, in my mind, not something that's fun.
Yeah. Well, it was a blast. It was a crazy challenge because it was so interesting and full of political rhetoric. But we had no idea what we were doing starting out. I mean, we were like, let's get a petition going. I mean, we wasted a number of months just bumbling through, thinking like, well, of course you need petitions to change laws. That's how it works, right? And I mean, it was so naive. And this is coming from somebody with a master of public policy. Like, I dig public policy. I like the mash. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with politics, but I had no clue how to actually get a law changed. It wasn't until one of our board members was like, we need to talk to a lobbyist. I know somebody. And Teresa Kostrava, we became our lobbyist and really led us to getting wise about how laws get changed in North Carolina. That's when things started getting positive momentum.
All right, we're going to go off on a tangent a little bit here then. So if petitions don't work, what is a good first step if somebody wants to get laws moving in the right direction for their own business?
Yeah, or their personal issue or whatever. The thing to do is to meet with your elected officials, to contact them, call them, go arrange a meeting, say, you're my elected official and I live in your district, or I work in your district, or I have a business in your district, to establish that relationship, to get to know them, to have them for brewery owners, for business owners, have them come visit and see what happens. Particularly in the beer world, where we have a good story to tell, that we're creating jobs, we're drawing from North Carolina's agricultural traditions, we're in manufacturing, and who doesn't want to visit a brewery? I mean, most legislative elected officials will want to do that versus other things that they might have to do. So really that one-to-one contact is really key.
All right, and then you guys got a lobbyist to help with the cause. Was that critical, or do you think you could have done that without a lobbyist?
It was critical. We would not have gotten it done without Teresa, for sure. Yeah, and part of it is the sort of, for lack of a better term, sausage making of how bills get changed. And we were in an interesting position because we, as a consumer-oriented grassroots organization, had no leverage. We had nothing to offer. We had no quid pro quo. We were just some loose group of beer lovers across the political spectrum who had nothing to gain directly from this law change. In fact, I remember meeting with some elected officials, and one guy in particular, he's like, all right, I'll hear you out. What are you here for? I explained the law, and he's like, that's cute, that's all well and good, but why are you really here? I'm like, no, I mean, that's like, all I want to do is spend more money in North Carolina. I have no other agenda.
So nobody in your group was an actual brewer or had a brewery?
We had support from breweries. We had support from businesses like Total Wine. And so we enlisted and created levels of sponsorship to basically pay for the lobbying effort, right? The lobbyist wasn't free. She did offer us a very attractive rate, knowing that it was going to be hard for us to pay what a normal lobbyist is worth. That's air quotes, by the way. I mean, worth, but whatever. Again, sausage making. It's a murky world. But we could only raise so much, and she worked within our budget, but we also had business sponsorships for sure. As for the membership and the leadership of the organization, we were all volunteers, either just beer lovers or loosely affiliated with the industry.
Right on. So the lobbyists then, it brought, I guess, a relationship probably with the representatives and the people in the government, but also just the knowledge of how in the world to go from, hey, this is what we want to do, to making it happen.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So how do you find a good lobbyist? Like, did you just call around, or?
Our guy Eric had an in. He's just like, I know somebody who I think would be a good fit. And for us, we're pretty visible. Campaign, topic, issue, hot button. And so Teresa was pretty wise to realize or acknowledge that that it could be something that would increase her visibility, and like that kind of hot topic issue would be something that would get her. I mean, some people weren't willing to take it on because it's too hot, the hot button of an issue. But she saw that as an opportunity, and I knew that we were going to win when I saw two old school legislators walking in the hallways, not knowing we were there, not knowing who the hell we were, and amongst themselves, one of the guys asks the other, "You heard of that pop the cap law? What you think about that?" And I was like, you know what, we're gonna win because they're talking about it, right? That's all. And that was that moment of like, we're going to get there. And you know, it took 2.5 years, but we successfully raised the cap from 6 to 15%.
Oh, okay. And that happened in 2005, right?
Yes, sir.
And then 5 years later, you started Fullsteam Brewery. So what filled that space, and when did you come up with the concept for Fullsteam?
Well, I started gaining confidence that I could work for myself. So I had mentioned that I worked for Weather News. I was a consultant then, and kind of worked not out of their main office, but I established my own home office. And so one of the things that had brought me a lot of anxiety and uncertainty was how do I work for myself? How do I pay for health insurance? How do I manage pulling away from the corporate world? And Weather News was a good first step in testing that out, just by establishing my own office and kind of like learning more about what it took. I then ended up taking a job as a kind of a freelance writer, and really my own consulting company, where I did work with, did a lot of writing basically. And that pulled me even further away from working for another business to where I was like, oh, I'm my own boss. Like, I'm doing this, right? And I mentioned health insurance. That was a big consideration for me because in 2006, I was diagnosed with, well, I had already been diagnosed with, but the shit hit the fan with kidney failure. So I knew that I was... my kidneys were failing. I first received the diagnosis about 5-6 years prior, and it was at that point that I was in dire situation and was actually on dialysis. So my wife gave me a kidney. She was a match, and she donated a kidney. So that was a big part of what was happening in my life then. How I was able to get health insurance. Both through my current employer and then long term, knowing that was a consideration, and to gain elements of confidence and knowledge that I could pull away from working for others and figure this stuff out for myself or for my own business.
All right. So again, a little tangent because I want to really talk about how you launched a brewery, but the working from home thing is an issue that seems to be a hot topic. I've got a bunch of friends that have tried it, whether they're working for a big company or for themselves, and they're just like, man, I don't know how you do it because I can't stay motivated. So what were some of the ways that you motivated yourself to stay on task when you're sitting at home with a million things probably trying to distract you?
Well, during that time I had 2 small kids. So what I learned was I couldn't actually be at home. So I ended up getting a small office and leasing that out and like literally going to work. Even though I was going to work in a in a little suite by myself, it was almost more like a co-working situation where there were other people around me, because it's too hard for me to work at home and actually get anything done.
Right.
So for those people out there who are like, how can I do it? I had too many distractions. I totally relate because it was impossible for me. But I figured it out by literally reporting to work and going to a separate location where I was at work. And then I could leave that at that time, and come home.
So this whole time, was your wife working and helping to pay the bills while you were doing these other things? Because I guess you probably weren't getting paid anything while you were volunteering for the Pop the Cap.
Yeah, I wasn't getting paid for that. I had my steady day jobs. My wife has been homeschooling our kids for a number of years, and at that time, I think the kids weren't fully homeschooled then, so she was working some. But I guess this would be another thing is for us, it was really important to not live beyond our means. So we've always led a pretty humble lifestyle. And that was a big key in actually getting the business started, is that I didn't have a huge mortgage. I drove a 96 Toyota Corolla until about 2 years ago. And it's not for everybody, but it would be a lot harder to be able to do what I'm doing now if I had high overhead.
Right. So you liked beer and you worked on this legislation, and then there must have been some seed planted during that time. What was the decision? How did you come up with the decision to start a brewery? What made you want to do this?
Well, I think a lot of it is the kidney failure part, where literally that drove the name Full Steam, to live life full steam ahead, and blazing forward with purpose and pride, not looking over your shoulder, worrying about what other people think of you. To be on this mission and this quest. For me, it was not only a quest to explore what it means to be a Southern brewery, but also how I try to live life. So our F is backwards because our logo is a backwards F. We're looking backwards towards our food and farming and beer history, but we're moving full steam ahead in redefining what that means. So that is a symbol for both the business and for my life, looking back at what shapes who I am and who I, as a family person, as a community-oriented person, and thinking about how I drive that forward.
Right. So what I find particularly interesting is that you weren't a home brewer, you weren't really brewing in any regards, but you started a brewery, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the people who start breweries are the ones that have this romantic notion. It's kind of like starting a bike shop, right? Like, I love bikes, I want to open a bike shop. I love beer, I love brewing, I want to open a brewery. And you, on the other hand, you just, like, what was the invitation or impetus to start a brewery if you weren't already brewing?
I was definitely an outlier. I was way unusual to be a brewery owner who didn't have a brewing expertise, and I approached it a lot more with a much more of a focus on marketing and using social media and kind of building the name of what we were planning on doing through like what we were talking about earlier, through blogging and kind of long form writing and connecting with people online, right? So that was a way different approach in 2008, 2009, when we were starting to really build some momentum around our plans. We also did tastings and previews using small batch beer out of my then head brewer's homebrew rig. So we would do preview, sneak peeks, kind of pop-ups and all that, much more on the kind of marketing and guerrilla marketing tactics and process than any brewery was doing at that time. Now it's kind of more commonplace, But combining that marketing approach with my non-traditional background presented some challenges, particularly in fitting in and feeling like I belonged in the industry. But frankly, that's where I excel. Is like I'm not a good fit in kind of guy. Like I work best on the fringes. I think that's where innovation happens, and you keep from being casual and comfortable and a little lazy sometimes. Is if you're in an in club, you're working within a system, and they may be the cool kids, they may be in the know, and they may connect you to other people who are in their club, but it's not who I am really. I like working on the fringe a little bit, so it worked well for me starting out, and I think it's worked well for us 7 years later.
Were there other business types that you were considering? Or
you mean to start something up?
Yeah, like did you just know, hey, I want to do a brewery, or were you looking at, well, I could do this or
this?
My God.
So when this makes it sound like I just throwing darts, but I looked at starting up a crepe restaurant. It's a good thing we're not recording or anything like that. No, I was all over. I just knew, I was like, oh my God, I'm so ready to be my own boss, and I have all these interests and passions, and man, so it went from obviously beer, but other things that I looked at was food service, the crepe thing. I'm trying to think of what other things were in, like just fleeting kind of stuff. I think my wife and I talked about making soaps sometime. Like, it's just the idea of creating, doing something and being your own boss. But beer was definitely where it was at for me. Right. Without a doubt.
Of all the things to start, this one seems to have some of the highest barriers to entry in that you need a lot of equipment if you're going to do it at scale, especially, but also like the logistical issues of the different laws and permits that you need to do an alcoholic product. What was the startup process for this?
Well, the barriers to entry, yeah, there are some, but at the same time, there's 200 breweries in North Carolina, so we all figure it out eventually. But a lot of it was around that initial uncertainty about, is there a difference between brewery and brew pub? We're not going to do a restaurant so much. It's going to be more about manufacturing and making beer, and we wanted to do food, and now 7 years later we're only now figuring out what food is going to look like for us. But we knew that we were going to be a production brewery first, and so I remember starting out early on thinking there was some distinction in North Carolina between a restaurant oriented brew pub versus a production brewery. And by law and by license, there really isn't much of a difference. There are regulatory considerations, from the health department standpoint and all of that. But really, that there were I just had a lot of misinformation, things that I was misinformed on, that I just had to suss out for myself and figure that out.
Were other breweries helpful for you guys? Like, did you talk to other brewery owners? And
some were, some weren't so much. For sure, some are more guarded than others, but we found in general it's a pretty collegiate, congenial industry, and folks are generally willing to share, and that has to carry through to us doing the same. So that's one of the things that I've looked to give back from like my role with 5 years in the North Carolina Craft Brewers Guild, spending a lot of time helping other breweries start up, and looking at that as part of my mission is like, I want to give back and help that in a way that others did kind of guide me along and encourage me in that startup process.
And so right now it's 2017. You've got, I think you said 14 different beers you guys brew in-house?
Yeah, about that.
And then how many employees do you have now?
24.
What did that look like when you started? How many beers did you start with, and how many people?
That's a deceptively simple question. We had 5 beers when we first, four beers and then 5 beers. So you see our tap system here. We didn't have that. We had it up against the wall. The taps came out of the wall. We didn't even have a basin or a bin. We had a big bucket. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, it's amazing what we started with. We were very lucky in our timing was just good because our local community was eager for a brewery that had a public-facing component to it. There was another brewery in town, but it was more of a production-only brewery. And so they were very generous with us as we figured out, and have been, as we've kind of worked through our foibles and learning curve and all that. We have a much more smooth customer experience now with a point of sale system versus like a plug register, like literally like, something like grandmother would have had. So it's a much better customer experience. But we had 4 beers on tap on opening day, and we had probably 3, 4, 5 employees and a good number of part-time people as the bar started getting very popular.
So from day one, you guys had an open bar along with the production side of it in the back.
Pretty much day one. I think we had like a week and a half where we were just distributing beer first before we opened this up.
And it was that, man, there's so many questions. So it seems like you could go a number of ways. You could do what you did where you had both. You could just do production and distribution. Or you could do just production for on-site sales, and I mean, you guys kind of like started with everything at once. That's a lot to start with.
Yeah.
Why not limit it? Why not start small with like just on-site or just retail?
Well, you certainly can and should. We wanted to let people know that we were a production-oriented brewery with a tavern component. So that kind of both and approach was very important to us. It wasn't until a little later on that we started working with third-party distribution, where another wholesaler takes the beer for us and handles the distribution part. So that folded in later, and that's an important and growing third element of our business. The on-premise tavern is critical because that's your highest profit point. I mean, your margins are so much better on-site when people are drinking the beer that you make right here. And that helps fuel the less efficient, especially early on, just distributing brewery, where you're, instead of taking a keg and selling a keg for $165, $170 to a retailer, you're able to take that beer and sell it on site at $5 a pint, right? That matters, especially early on. It's only when you grow up and you get more efficient with like the equipment, even that we're getting today that you saw, right? That's going to help us make beer at a lower cost of goods to compete in the distribution area. But we couldn't, I mean, I want to say we couldn't have one without the other, but we could have just gone on premise. I think our equipment, we would have not been making beer as often as our capacity allows if we had just done on-site. And it was also a big risk. I didn't really know how many people would show up,
Right. And so you've been in this building from day one? Mm-hmm. Because you guys can't see this listening in, but Fullsteam is an amazing consumer-facing brewery because it's in a warehouse, but the whole front, at least half, if not 2/3, is just like an open beer hall. And you guys let people bring in their own food. You can bring a birthday cake and have a party here as long as they're drinking your beer.
Oh, they can come and not drink our beer if they want. I mean, how are we going to monitor that, Yeah. So we definitely, there's some community-oriented events where we open up the space and say yes, and we know that they're not going to be, spending a whole lot of money here. But maybe they'll come back, or maybe they'll bring a friend. So we are in the business of saying yes. We want to make an all-welcome, inclusive environment, even when we start doing our own food, we're still going to allow people to bring in other food here. One of our core values is quiet confidence, which is always funny to me about talking about quiet confidence as one of our values, because if I'm mentioning it, it's like it's not that quiet if I'm blathering about it, right? But I think it's relevant here in that like we have a quiet confidence about what we do, in that like we're not going to not let you bring in outside food when we're doing our own food, or we're going to feature guest taps on tap when we don't have a beer style that they do really well that we don't do, right? There's a holistic approach to our vision, which is like, bring in outside food if you want, but we're going to have some really good food here, right? Or we have really great beer, but if it's not for you, that's okay. Or they make really good, a really good, I don't know, Scottish ale or whatever it might be. Or we're particularly proud of this beer made from a friend of ours who also brews with foraged ingredients. So kind of rambling, but the on-premise experience it's constantly evolving. But I'm finally getting to a place where I feel like it feels like home. Like I'd hang out here, kind of thing.
Yeah, it is cool. And I actually wanted to ask you about the concept because you're in Durham, I'm in Greensboro. We're about 50 minutes away from each other. But the first beer bar that I saw like this was yours. We heard about it and we drove to Durham to come check it out and hang out. And then a year later we get Gibbs in Greensboro, which has a similar format, and a couple others now have opened up in downtown Greensboro that use the same. You can kind of bring in your own snacks and food if you want, but they're selling their beer. Did you guys come up with this, or did you borrow this idea from somebody else? I
mean, I think it's form and function, and it reminds me of this thing that I saw last week that was on Facebook, which was a series of images that said craft beer starter kit, right? And it had Edison bulbs. It had literally those same damn bar stools that we have, the same exact ones. It had seating like we have right now with the long seating, and I was like, damn it, you're funny, but you suck, I mean, it was 6 of the 8 things were yep, that's our space,
Bar in a box.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean,
and then you just need the Mr. Brew, right?
That's it. That's all it takes. I mean, there's so it's form and function. There are some functional things that just make good sense for us. I mean, these tables, these picnic benches that we're on are German-style beer hall benches that have a functional purpose. They are, I think it's 22 inches wide. They're a little closer than your standard benches because it's meant to facilitate conversation. So if you notice, we're here, it's just a little bit closer than what normal American, sense of distance is, right? That's by design, right? And other, is this function or form, the big barrel doors here? These come from an old fermenter, a Fullsteam Brewing fermenter, where you can see the BBL marks and the notches right there. But it also serves as a way to separate the air-conditioned bar from this big, less than conditioned open space. And it has a neat kind of throwback visual element to it as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, it seems like good marketing too. Kind of even when you started up with opening up to consumer sales immediately, it draws people in, gives them somewhere to go, something to talk about, and kind of puts your brand out there as something cool and different, as opposed to just having it pop up in a store one day and hoping somebody finds it on the shelf.
Yeah, and not just opening the doors, but also curating on-premise activities that speak to who we are. So we're heavily engaged in the community. Again, we have a spirit of yes, where we're hosting a lot of events, either directly or indirectly. A number of them have a give back element to them, where we're donating a portion of proceeds to a nonprofit, or somehow tying in our love of community with a nonprofit or our own efforts. But I'm trying to think of what's going on this week or soon. The last Tuesday of each month is belly dancing and beer. And so we literally we'll have Middle Eastern kind of music on stage, musicians, about 8 of them play for this open, kind of open to all types, all experience levels, belly dancing troupe or organization that encourages women of all different skill levels and experience and all that, from the very beginner to the most, like professional, and it's just like, here at a brewery on a Tuesday night, right? Suman's setting up here, doing her Indian food. She's been a part of a Fullsteam every Monday night for like the past 5 or 6 years. Tonight we'll also have a wine and design class where attendees can draw, get a coaching on art and keep their bull that they're drawing with them. Last weekend we did postcards to elected officials, where we supplied the postcards and the postage and had over 500 people write their elected officials on whatever they wanted to write. We didn't tell them what to write. We didn't say, oh, well, you're going to write these. If they want to send a letter to their elected official that is like in support of that person, then that's what we want. If they want to send, if other people want to send and say, I wish you would do this and this, then that's what we want, right? We just want that civic engagement. And our goal is to be a front door, a welcome center, and a community hall for Durham, North Carolina.
Right on. So we're going to backtrack a little bit to the startup process again. So you found your master brewer. So you were going to run the business side. He was going to run the actual brewing process and create the beers. Did you know this guy? How'd you find him? And then did he bring his equipment, or did you just then you have to go out and buy all this equipment?
Sure. So Chris Davis was our first head brewer for 3.5 years, and Brian has been our head brewer for about 3 years. And Chris and I met each other through a beer dinner. It was actually a Pop the Cap type dinner after the law had changed. I clung on to Pop the Cap, and I did these events celebrating North Carolina craft beer and beer culture in North Carolina, and I would just do these traveling events trying to figure out what it meant for me and for the industry. And so he and I met at one at Carolina Brewery, where we were showcasing the 5 GABF, Great American Beer Festival award-winning beers from 2006. So that was over a decade ago now, which is kind of like, wow, to think that far back. He was a home brewer. I was thinking about starting a business, a beer business. I have no real expertise in brewing. He was a very dedicated and is a very dedicated brewer at that time on the home brewing side of things. So he had his own rig, and we just started testing batches out.
What size rig? Because you've got huge, 60-barrel tanks.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Right
so
there.
he's on a like a kegel systems, basically. So he's working on a 3-vessel keg system, just cut open old kegs.
What was the learning curve to go from doing keg-sized batches to 60 keg-sized batches?
Well, we had. There's so many parts in all of this. We had another person help us out, Brooks Hamaker, who was the one of the original brewers at Abita, and he done a lot of consulting. So he came on to help us out, and he brought in a lot of that expertise on how to scale up. So how do you go from a homebrew system to a large-scale manufacturing system? And the first beer that we brewed on the new system was a Basil Farmhouse Ale, and we just did it as a one-time, let's see if this works. We've never brewed it before as a little test batch. No one's ever seen it, and it ended up being a big hit for us. So that beer became what is now Southern Basil, which is one of our best sellers in the summer months, and it actually turned out great that very first time that we brewed it. I think we had more challenges, not scaling up from the small system to the larger, but in figuring out the nuances of the large system and how to make it work consistently.
What kind of steps do you take to ensure consistency from batch to batch?
Well, now we do a lot more, because now we have a dedicated yeast wrangler. We have a lot more QA, QC equipment in place, and we have James's job is to do just this, is to just ensure consistency, yeast viability, temperature control, all with Brian's oversight on the brewing process, to make sure that we're working with clean equipment, clean yeast, clean, viable, healthy yeast, fresh ingredients, at the right temperature. So we're constantly learning.
It seems like ingredients is going to be, in my mind, a big challenge. One of the biggest challenges is consistency from month to month, season to season. Things grow differently.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that not only are the ingredients coming in close enough to the ingredients before then, but then also that you're doing the right thing?
Sometimes you lean into that. So like that, I mentioned the Basil Farmhouse Ale. One of the unique elements of that particular beer is the story of how it is inconsistent, right? And so we celebrate the fact that beer doesn't taste the same throughout the season. We ferment at slightly different temperatures. Basil evolves from May to September. Basil is not the same, doesn't have the same taste, right? It has a vibrant, punchy flavor in the beginning of the season towards a more woodsy, anisey flavor toward the end of the season. And so one way to control is just openly acknowledge and be honest with people. Yeah, the beer is different because beer is agriculture. That's cool, right?
Right.
Now, we don't want to do that with our IPA. And we were just talking about, Brian and I were just discussing about how this year's batch of Amarillo, highly prized, sought-after hop, seems to have a slightly different spice characteristic to it than it has in years past, which can lean more into a little bit more melon and bright kind of notes. So, what do you do about that?
What can you? I mean, do you blend then, or do you just say,
can blend,
hey, it's going to be different?
With a hop like Amarillo, you can sell it because it's in high demand, and you can use something else. But you have to be adaptable, for sure. Yeah. Well, it's particularly challenging for us because we use a lot of local seasonal ingredients, and so we can explain it away pretty easily with a beer like Southern Basil. But say our First Frost, the persimmon, the winter persimmon ale made with foraged native persimmons. I mean, those will taste different from year to year. Depending on the harvest and the conditions and all of that. So we do a little bit of blending to set aside and just kind of fold in different seasons as we can. But in some instances, you will have a different beer because you have different growing seasons. But the more we can remind people that beer is agriculture instead of just manufactured, then I'm fine with that.
So you started with 5 different beers, and what was the startup cost, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't mind you asking, but I don't want anybody else to know. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm happy to tell you, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, what would startup cost, and where did that capital come from?
$1.2 million to start out.
Wow.
Yep. And remember, I'm a guy with 96 Toyota Corolla, so it was a wagon, though. So it did have that.
So you could deliver beer in it.
I delivered beer in it. I totally delivered beer in it. I smashed the back window, hitting a speed bump thing, and the keg just, that's just what happens when you start out. But we are an LLC. We have 20 investors. Of that $1.2 million, about 75% of it was the equity investors from individual. High net worth individuals, and the rest was a bank loan from the SBA and a local bank.
How long till you guys were profitable?
Profitability is a ever-changing target, and I don't mean that to be elusive. It's just how do you measure profitability, particularly when you're taking your earnings and folding it back into your own expansion. So we were cash flow positive after about 10 months. So nice. It was a nice turnaround, but that's only because we had good on-premise traffic helping to fuel this. Now, that does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that we're making it big, right? In fact, last year's our net was really, really low because we're expanding and we're growing in areas that are not nearly as profitable as the on-premise, which is leveled off. but our third party is growing, but that's a very low profit margin.
I mean, third-party distribution.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but in North Carolina, you can self-distribute up to X number of barrels or cases, and then after that, it has to run through an established distributor or wholesaler.
Yeah.
How did you find those wholesalers, and what are some of the challenges in dealing with them?
Sure. Just real quick on that limit, it's 25,000 barrels brewed in total, so it's not the amount that you self-distribute or it's how much you make. It's tied to your production level. So we're on target to do 7,000 barrels. So we're shy of that, but the way we're starting to grow, we'll be hitting that before too long, that limit. So a lot of it for us is trust. Well, for anybody it's trust. That's not very particularly insightful. We work with Tryon Distributing statewide. Other breweries will work with wholesalers, a number of wholesalers, particularly in the Budweiser network, which is a lot more patchwork. If you go with the Bud network, you're going to be working with like Bud of Asheville and the local Bud wholesaler in Greensboro and the one in the Triangle and the one in Charlotte. So you're working with a lot of different Bud-oriented wholesalers that have a craft beer focus and stitching them together to cover the entire state. For us, we saw the value of going with a wholesaler who really aligns with our values, with our customers and our target market, and just covering third party for us throughout North Carolina. And we've generally done that. Well, we have done that with all the other states that we work with, the 3 other states we work with. So South Carolina, we have one wholesaler there, Alabama, Virginia. And we just like it's higher risk because if it goes awry, then you know, all your eggs are in one basket, but it works for us.
Do you find it challenging to get these wholesalers to focus on a smaller brand like you when they might have some giant brands in there that they can just go in and write orders for?
Yes, the further out we get from home, for sure.
All right. How do you deal with that?
Well, send threatening letters, the dog poo and flames thing, that works.
Classic.
It's a classic, but it works. We're fortunate in that we're growing so much locally that we can deal with the fact that we're having attention deficit challenges in other markets by just slow playing it and being like, you know what, it's all about local right now, and understanding that it's a very crowded market. We have a lot of opportunity here. We're going to hit capacity. If all we did was the Triangle market, we could easily hit capacity working with our wholesaler, our own self-distribution, and our on-premise tavern. So we just spread it out as we can to keep us relevant in other states, knowing that we're going to be a very small part of their portfolio, but kind of an interesting one because it really does force us to differentiate or at least send them products that keep us curious in the marketplace, in a very crowded marketplace. So we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we just sent a Pilsner and an IPA and a Pale Ale to Alabama or to Virginia. But if we supplement that or focus more on seasonals and curious beers or foraged beers, not as many breweries are going to be doing that, and it helps us keep relevant.
Right. Do you have a master plan for multi-state growth, or are you just kind of seat of the pants type?
Our plan is in 10 years to be from New Orleans to DC. That's the vision, and to be at about 75,000 barrels in 10 years. To be one of the top 10 breweries native to the South. So not like an expanding brewery like a New Belgium or Oscar Blues, Sierra Nevada, those don't count in my book, but top 10 that came from the American South. So we have a ways to go. We're like number 50 now or something like that. But we are growth oriented and we feel like we have a good story. That might mean that we don't need to go that far, and we can achieve that vision in just the Carolinas or just a few states, that we don't need to go up and down the southeast coastal seaboard or whatever to make that happen. I don't know. I mean, it's changing. The beer industry has changed radically since the time we started this interview. It's just like literally changing all the time. So who knows?
And so that's like to go from 7,000 to 70 something thousand. That's what 1,000% growth in 10 years. So like basically doubling every year.
Yeah.
Well, 100% growth every year.
Yeah.
Is
It's about 40% growth actually, because it's got an exponential effect.
Math isn't my strong
No, but
point.
you were rolling with it.
But
I was like, oh, like totally.
Sounds great. Definitely want that. So how do you do that? Because either people have to start drinking more beer, or you're displacing other brands. So how do you guys plan on getting that growth?
Great question. I mean, if you look at the success of a lot of breweries with a local focus, they're able to really dominate in their local market and achieve those levels within a very tight region. So Old Mecklenburg is doing really well. Noda is doing really well in the Charlotte region just by hyper-focusing on the opportunity in the greater Charlotte, Mecklenburg County area, as well as branching out a little bit beyond that. A brewery like Sun King or in Indianapolis, or maybe when Bell's was starting out with its focus on Michigan, or New Glarus in Wisconsin, they're doing really well in their local region. New Glarus is a great example. I think they're 180,000 barrels or something like that, all in Wisconsin, right? So I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for sure. We just have a lot of work to do to get there in our immediate local area. I think the challenge is, do we risk spreading ourselves too thin by trying to be up and down, from New Orleans to DC? Are we better served realizing gains in a concentrated area where you see, Fullsteam just about everywhere? I do ask people, and I'll ask you, like, what's the breakout brewery of the Triangle? So you're a Greensboro guy. Well, what's the breakout brewery of the Triangle?
Triad?
No, of this region.
For you guys?
Yeah.
You're the only one I could name off the top of my head.
I don't, we're not breaking out. Like, and we're much lower than a lot of other breweries around us here. I guess my answer is, because a rhetorical question, there really isn't one, right? There's no breakout brewery of the Triangle area, right? If anything, it's a brewery in other parts of the breweries in the other parts of the state that have done really well in our local market. And so I think that's ours to grasp and others to grasp too. Maybe it's not a zero-sum game, maybe there's multiple ones, but there's so much opportunity here where we can really do well in the community that we love, providing fresh beer that we distribute ourselves, and tied into the local economy, where we're giving back to the economy, where we're buying from farmers in this market, encouraging other businesses here. So it's really about local.
All right, and so you mentioned some of the events you do on site and the giving back in the local community. What else do you do to market it? Because if you've got really strong distribution here in your hometown, how do you continue to grow that? Because you got to get the word out to people who still haven't tried it, but then you also you've got to displace something. Like, so are you displacing other craft brews trying to come in? Are you displacing the Budweiser and Miller Lite drinkers?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just about being visible and having opportunities for people to choose us. We are not in any main Triangle area grocery stores, right? So you won't find us in Harris Teeter, Kroger. Well, we're in Lowe's, and I consider them a major one. But a lot of the traditional grocery stores, we're just not there yet, because they don't want to work with a whole self-distributing brewery.
And Tryon can't.
We're making that happen. Okay. So that's a part of the growth. Is we're saying, all right, well, we have capacity. We have our canning line that you saw. We can make more beer. Instead of trying to convince a Harris Teeter / Kroger, same company, right? To work with a self-distributing company, self-distributing brewery, why don't we instead just have our wholesaler, who they prefer to work with, take care of that for us? So we just this week are signing over our distribution in the local market on the chain level to have our wholesaler take care of that business for us. Now that's a lower margin for us, but it wasn't going to get done anyway, and it's high volume, low margin. So it solves that nugget. So that helps a lot immeasurably with capacity. I mean, yes, draft is critical for us. On-premise consumption is a big part of who we are. Independent stores are a big part of who we are, especially on the more esoteric side of things. But to be able to grow into chain and mass retail, to say nothing of like C-stores, like convenience stores, which we haven't even scratched the surface of, there's a lot of opportunity right here in our local market.
Yeah, well, I think that's an important lesson for small brands trying to get into the big stores, is that they don't realize all of the hurdles in getting into them. I mean, slotting fees among them. I don't know if it's slotting fees for beer, but like so you said, working with a distributor that they're already working with, a supplier they're already working with, because they don't want to have to deal with a million different people pulling up at the docks every day.
Yeah. So. It gets murky with slotting fees and sets and all of that, but it's illegal to purchase space for alcohol in North Carolina, but you can have preferred sets that stores work with wholesalers to design and say, okay, well this is the Budweiser region, and this is the Miller region, and this is the indie wholesaler, specialty wholesaler region, and so you have to kind of work within their parameters to make it happen.
How do you work out those sets if the brands or the distributors can't pay for that?
I don't know. I know that the wholesalers work closely with the retailers to come up with a design that maximizes profitability. And that's one of those reasons why you don't really see a self-distributing brewery getting into the chain business, is because they figured out the machinations and the who does what and how it's all legal and within the parameters that they set, but within the boundaries of the law. Gets beyond my pay grade. Yeah.
Taking them on deep sea fishing trips and stuff, huh?
I don't.
Special vacations.
Have no idea.
Right on. All right. So one of the other growth tactics you guys are looking into now is you're opening a restaurant.
Yeah.
To go alongside the brewery.
We have food service. I would call it short of being a restaurant, right? Because I always have visions of waiters with napkins on their arm and all of that.
Quick service, but probably gourmet.
A few touches of cool things that are on the higher end, but also just some good everyday bar snacks.
And why? Why are you doing that?
Oh man, your questions are deceivingly simple. We are doing it because it's time. We wanted to start up a food service day one, but we didn't have money to, because we just needed to open the doors. We're in a position now where we want to enhance the customer experience and own more of the customer experience. So a lot of times, like with the Beasley's that you just had here, I've been behind the bar and I'm like, Beasley's, it's great. We made this beer to go with fried chicken. Ashley Christensen, James Beard award-winning chef, she and her team and our team worked together to create a beer that went with fried chicken, and here it is. And people are like, that's great. And we're all kind of looking around. Do you have anything to like? Do you have any fried chicken? Do you have anything besides this moon pie and this jar of peanuts to like demonstrate that it pairs well with food? And be it for Beasley's or the other dozen or so beers that we have on tap, we haven't been able to tell that story. That beer goes, and our beer particularly goes exceptionally well with food. That's a missing component of the customer experience here. We've been very fortunate to be a home for the food truck industry. We were kind of the first stop for a lot of food trucks early on. About a dozen of them have graduated to their own brick and mortar space, in large part because they were able to have a home here, or not in large part, but like I take some confidence and pleasure in knowing that they had some good nights and that this was an anchor for them, to give them the confidence to either do their own, scale up and do their own thing, or to not. I mean, more of them have decided this isn't the business for them. right? Or they didn't have the right market or whatever. And not just food trucks, but other businesses that have come in, like Cocoa Cinnamon came in as Bite Coffee early on. And now, like, they're on their third location, their third Cocoa Cinnamon coffee emporium, right? We've had cupcake makers and stock soup and like a whole gamut of food enterprises that have used this as a lab of sorts, right? Now we want to do the same, right? We want to have that lab-like experience where we test our food concept and pair it with beer and control more of the customer experience to shepherd it in a way that showcases our beer the best way possible. And frankly, too, I'll say that it sucks when a food truck doesn't show up, and they don't always show up. So if you're counting on a food truck to be there to provide food on a Friday night and they're AWOL, that's a few $1,000s in lost revenue, and we just can't afford that anymore.
A few thousand for you guys? Mm-hmm. How's that? People just don't drink as much, or they leave earlier because there's no food?
Yeah, they're just like, oh, there's no food at Fullsteam today. We'll, go to the myriad of other options that are in the neighborhood.
Huh. So the restaurant actually serves two purposes, and it helps you sell more beer, and you'll make money off the food as well.
Right.
Cool.
That's exactly right.
Well, actually, the food truck thing is, I think, a good lesson too. Is that if you have something that you just want to test the concept of, you're not 100% sure you want to do it or what's going to work, then find somebody like you that will let you test the concept at their premise with a pre-existing crowd.
Yeah.
So once go gung ho.
Once we open up, we and we've mentioned this to the food trucks. We're asking them to find another home in the area or in Durham. But the every single response that I've gotten from the trucks has been very positive and affirming. Some people haven't written back, so who knows what they're thinking, but it's been generally really good, and it's been time for us. We wanted to do the hand pie, not hand pie. We're calling them bullies. They're handheld pies that with local seasonal ingredients that go well with beer, bar snacks, and then a play on the meat and three. The traditional kind of workers' meat and three with an ever-changing protein and sides that you can mix and match on. That's I think a fun concept for this space, and I've got in Kyle McKnight an awesome chef who's going to help make it happen.
Cool. When's that going to open?
Sometime this year. We're going to hopefully phase in a preview test kitchen of it in this little galley back here in a month or so. And then the full kitchen where the cans currently are, where we're housing those, that's probably about 4 or 5 months away.
Okay, sweet. All right, so I want to recap to make sure I'm getting one of the basic ideas that I'm taking away from this. So when you first started, it sounds like you launched with some beers, and what helped get you guys on the map, so to speak, was that you did some really interesting seasonal beers. You didn't just come out with a Pilsner and an IPA. You did, the basil summer ale.
The sweet potato lager. Yep.
Right. Is that, do you credit that type of thing with getting you guys up and running, or was there something else that just kind of got Fullsteam rocking and rolling?
Knowing and our differentiation, or what I call the tilt of the head moment, has been really key for us. Also, just being very intentionally connected to the local community, and not in a way that's just like community is important, but like we're, whether or not a business cares about its community and expresses that sort of genuine level of giving back and connectedness. I think is the other part. Serving a market need too, a place that was an all welcome, come as you are type environment that defied the rules but worked within the boundaries. So defied the rules in that it wasn't a restaurant, it wasn't anything that people had really seen before, but we didn't flaunt like we didn't break any rules. It's just that like you could bring your dog but have a beer, you could bring your kids but have a beer, and that was a lot more we got a lot of shit for that.
Well, you look at the amount of floor space that you have here that's not revenue generating, and a lot of restaurants would look at that, and any business would look at that and be like, you guys are insane, because the vast majority of the space here is just open tables for people to hang out.
Right. Yeah. It's I think we'll be able to keep that going for the long haul, where it's not like all of a sudden, you know, like 10 years from now you come in and be like, oh my God, Fullsteam, you're trying to cram in as much, you know, dollar per square foot as you possibly can. We don't own the building, but we have a good landlord who we've been fortunate to work on a long-term vision to be here. And when we first got in, this was looked at as warehouse, manufacturing, storage space, and you kind of get what you pay for, you know. So you have that open air environment, but you also don't have air conditioning right here. You want air conditioning, we're going to have to pay for it, because our, you know, it's this play between rent and, you know, landlord contribution versus tenant contribution, and everything that you see here pretty much has been on our own dime, because we got in at a good time at a lower price. But we don't own the building, so we have these considerations to make in how we evolve the space. Do we keep it open and ambient to where, you know, it's sometimes hot in the summer, but it'll be cool in the bar area? All these things that I, you know, literally keep me up at night as I think about how we make this space continue to work for the community. But going back to your earlier point on what makes the magic, I do think it's the connection to the community and the differentiated beers. Now, the beer thing has been hard for us. Can I ramble on that for a little bit? Okay. The beer thing has been a challenge for us because I think early on, I think people thought we were weirder than we really were, right? So I remember one time being at a local bar and this guy, not knowing who I was, I was just sitting next to him, and he's grumbling about how Fullsteam, blah, 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 this and that, and he's like, Fullsteam, he's like, putting moon pies in beer and shit, and it was like, I had this decision to make. I was like, should I tell him who I am, and like, how do you do it in a way that's respectful and not, he doesn't get defensive and all that? And I was like, you know what, I think I can do this. And I was like, hey man, hey, how's it going? Oh, good, you know, well, like that. And I'm like, hey, it's cool, man, totally cool, but I'm Sean of Fullsteam. I'm the owner, and I just want to, like, there's no moon pies in that beer. It's an homage to moon pie. It has some chocolate nibs, but that's not like that. And he got like super defensive and like anxious and recalcitrant and all of that. And I'm like, that wasn't really the point. It's just I wanted to like clarify and be like, there's not we don't brew with moon pies. It's in tribute. The Working Man's Lunch is a moon pie inspired beer because it was a moon pie and RC cola, the original Working Man's Lunch. So it's cola colored and it has some chocolate nibs. It's not that crazy. So who's wrong in that situation? Who failed in that situation? Ultimately, I did. Ultimately, it's my fault for not in how I handled that situation, but the fact that we got a customer, that we left a customer stranded on Misinformation Island, right? With thinking that we brew beer with moon pies and that we're just goofy and wacky and all that, because we took them down this path of like, we brew with persimmons, we brew with basil, it doesn't always taste the same, we brew with moon, and if that continuation of it to erroneous Misinformation Island, that's my fault, right? So I can't put that on him. We just have to be better about explaining the fact that we make a classic Pilsner, a classic IPA, that we make beers with a twist, like Working Man's Lunch, which is kind of its own thing, but doesn't have moon pie in it. That we make Beasley's, which you had, that has, it's a wit-based beer, but with black pepper, and that we do crazy things, there are more unusual things as well. So one of the challenges in our brand identity is that we aren't just a foraging brewery. We're not just a classic brewery. We're not just a beer geek brewery. We hit on elements of all these different things, trying to be all welcoming, trying to serve and cast a wide of a net as we can, and sometimes that's to our own detriment. Right. Sometimes we lose people along the way.
Right. I'm going to go off two random directions here. The first is, when you say foraging, I'm just imagining you and some of your staff out in the forest actually picking ingredients.
Good, because that's what we do.
Is that what you do? Really?
Yep.
Cool. And there's
we also work with a collective of people who are foragers that bring us foraged ingredients.
Right. And then from a food safety standpoint, is that like, how is that allowed? Do you have to like have it inspected first, or can you just literally go pick whatever you want?
Pick and
make
brew.
beer
I mean,
out
you're
of it?
boiling the hell out of these things anyway, so it's all fine. I mean, there's an industry for black walnuts. Okay, have you had black walnut before?
Maybe.
It's just like, you never have black walnut ice cream. It's that kind of medicinal, nutty, weird taste that's like a walnut in a parallel world, right? So black walnut's just a really, really unique type of walnut. I looked into this, actually. It's kind of interesting. There really aren't black walnut farms as much as there are collectives of black walnut aggregators that take walnuts from different drop-off points and distribution centers. They pick them up and then process them. So this is a little confusing, but basically the nation's largest black walnut producer, manufacturer, gets nuts from all over the U.S. at these hubs where people bring in black walnuts from their backyard, take them to literally auto repair centers and gas stations and grocery stores, and then that hub will send them to the manufacturer or the value-added processor to clean them, scrub them, hull them, make them into finished nuts. So how is that how's what we're doing any different than just like what they're doing? We're going to a local forest and gathering black walnuts. We're just not going to the collecting center. We're not going to the processing unit, value-added processing home. Or center. We're just bypassing two of those hubs in a traditional accepted system and going directly from the forest to the brew house.
It's awesome. That must create some supply concerns if you can't find something once in a while.
Oh, sure. But that's part of the story. It's like, sorry, we can't do a pawpaw beer this year. There were no pawpaws.
Right.
Oh, what's a pawpaw? Well, I mean, if all I have is an opportunity to tell you what a pawpaw is, then I'm doing my job, because our mission is to connect people to the land and to one another, right? And we might be able to do it not directly through the beer itself, but through the story of that beer or of that ingredient.
Sweet. And then my other random question is, with the planned growth, I imagine you guys will have to expand quite a bit, or do you have a lot of capacity here?
No, we have
to
we have to expand.
So where will the money for that come from? Will you have to take on more investors, bank loans, or can you
that's
fund
why
it
we're
from
here.
Growth?
If you brought your checkbook, right? Yeah. No, I mean, oh gosh. So we're facing a really interesting time in the craft beer world because conventional wisdom says wait it out.
Wait what out?
Wait out the market. Don't grow right now because equipment's still expensive. There's still breweries opening up and it's getting crowded and all that. Like, wait and see what happens. But our business right now and all the things that we're doing is saying, solve this capacity problem now. Don't wait. Don't anticipate. Don't bank your future growth on what could happen in the market. Plan for your own future. So we're in the middle of deciding what that means and how we go about our growth plan, how we fund it, who funds it, how we answer all those questions.
Right.
It's tough. I don't know. I mean, we are looking at an offsite. The need that we have, markets aside, is for an offsite production facility to go from 12 barrels at a time to 30 barrels at a time and just get scrappier in lowering our cost of goods so we can compete against breweries that have that scale and make delicious beer at a very low price point. But it may be that we look at other ways of going about it instead of going into a 60,000 square foot warehouse and going on the production side. Maybe we do another Fullsteam like this in another location. It's hard for me to see that because I don't know how we replicate this, because it's so unique and so its own thing. because this isn't really exactly a strip mall kind of like turnkey type operation. It's got its character and foibles and history and part of our look and vibe and all of that. So you can see that I haven't reconciled that fully. I don't know the answer, but we have to figure it out because we're crammed for space right now.
Great. Well, it's been a long one. I want to respect your time. I know you guys are opening soon, so thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah, I hope I didn't talk too long.
Congrats on the growth.
Thanks. Can I give a social media shout out?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at Fullsteam on Twitter, and at Fullsteam Brewery on Instagram, and of course on the Facebook. And then I broke out, we were talking about this earlier, I did social media for Fullsteam since the beginning, but now I have my own, which is Sean Lilly Wilson, Lilly, Sean Lilly Wilson, on Instagram and on Twitter. So that's me, and then the brewery itself.
Right on. And I'll put links to all that in the show notes for this interview.
Yay! Did you make it through all the way through? You should. Oh, you know what? Whoever did should say hi on Twitter and tell me that you did, and we'll give you at the very least a virtual high five.
Right on. And next time you're in Durham, North Carolina, be sure to come by Fullsteam Brewery and grab a beer.
Please do.
Let's go get one ourselves.
Yes.
All right. There are so many lessons in here, from keeping it lean during your early years to using the right growth and distribution partners. But I think the biggest takeaway is how they've cultivated their brand through a combination of interesting products, seasonal limited edition offerings, and a unique atmosphere that serves the community well beyond just keeping them refreshed. Sean brings in local music, food, and craftspeople to entertain and teach their customers, whether they're there to drink his beer or not. That goes a long way to building goodwill for his brand. And the beer is good too, really good. He and I sampled quite a few after I turned off the recorder, and suffice to say, I had to walk down the street, grab a burrito, and hang out in the coffee shop for a little while before I could drive home. From show notes, links, to some of the brands and things we talked about, and more, head to this podcast's blog post on thebuildcycle.com. Next week, I've got Boyd Johnson, founder of Boyd Cycling, a high-end bicycle wheel manufacturer out of South Carolina. Until then, say hi to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at The Build Cycle on all three. Real quick, I have a super awesome favor to ask. Can you head to iTunes, subscribe to the Build Cycle podcast, and leave us a review? There's a link directly to our iTunes page on thebuildcycle.com, and it would make such a difference in helping us grow. So thanks, and remember your ABCs. Always be closing in on building your own business. Later.